floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Former Liberal Minister Bains, you continue to be less than forthcoming about your active involvement in hand-picking conflict-ridden Annette Verschuren as chair of SDTC. You have repeatedly represented that you got a recommendation from PCO, and it was only thereafter that you made the decision to appoint Ms. Verschuren, as if your role was passive, but that isn't true, and you know it not to be true. You received a list of 5 recommended candidates from PCO in March of 2019. You ignored that list, and in April of 2019, you contacted Ms. Verschuren and asked her to apply for the role. It was only thereafter that Ms. Verschuren applied. It wasn't PCO that reached out to her. It was you, and that is detailed in the Ethics Commissioner's report. So why do you continue to mislead committee?
Thank you very much for the question. As I've indicated, these names were recommended by PCO. They went through the vetting process. As the PCO official has indicated, over 100 people applied. And so this was open to everyone. And this was a process that people could...
Former Liberal Minister Bains, you hand-picked her. That is established in your misleading committee, and that's now very clear, just as you continue to not answer questions. So I'll move on. Who asked you to contact Ms. Verschuren to apply as chair of the Green Slush Fund? Who was it who called you to tap her on the shoulder? Was it someone in the PMO?
To answer that question, as I stated in my opening remarks, I don't recall any such conversations, but it's not uncommon for me to speak with multiple people, even for the same role, to apply. And as the
former Liberal Minister Bains, I'll move on since you can't recall this, you can't recall that. Maybe there is something you will recall, and that is that you knew that Ms. Verschuren had a conflict of interest in that her company, NR was receiving $12 million in funding from SDTC at the time of her appointment. You knew that, and you appointed her anyway. Isn't that right?
Ms. Verschuren's credentials are well known. All that information...
Former Liberal Minister Bains, I didn't ask about Ms. Verschuren's credentials. I asked you whether you knew that she had a conflict of interest at the time that you made the decision to appoint her. Yes or no?
As I've stated, Ms. Verschuren went through the vetting process. Her name was recommended.
Liberal Minister Bains, I asked you a yes or no question. Did you know that she had a conflict of interest at the time that you appointed her as chair of SDTC?
Point of
yes
order.
Or no?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I have a point of order, Mr. Cooper. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
On two separate points. The first is with respect to respect of witnesses as they come before our committee. I've heard the member opposite say a lot of interesting things and pose a question that he thinks is a question or is actually a statement, and not allowing the witness to answer the question.
And your second point, Ms. Khalid?
Is on relevance, Chair.
Well, okay. I mean, as I've said, with some back and forth, members and courtesy, members are entitled to try to press witnesses for more specific answers, something Mr. Cooper's doing, and I think we're here today to answer these questions, so I'm not sure the relevance. But look, again, this is going well in that members are being allotted time, and Mr. Bains is providing answers that some members wish to probe further. So, Mr. Cooper, you've got just under 2 minutes left.
It's a yes or no question, former Liberal Minister Bains. Did you know that she had a conflict of interest at the time of her appointment? Yes or no?
Again, these names were presented to me. They went through the vetting process. And based on that, I made a recommendation.
Liberal Minister Bains, your amnesia is unacceptable. Ms.
Point of
Verschuren
order,
said
Chair.
that she spoke to you.
Point of order, Chair.
Just yes, Ms. Khalid.
That's quite disrespectful, Chair.
Ms. Khalid, I did anticipate this meeting would be a little bumpy because we're dealing with a former official. I'm certainly glad has appeared today. Mr. Bains is not unfamiliar with the push and pull of this place, so I am confident he's going to be able to respond to Mr. Cooper. And I'm not.
On that same point, Chair?
I'm not worried about Mr. Bains' ability here. But yes,
On that same point, Chair, it's not about whether a witness is able to handle rudeness or not. It is the conduct of our committee that concerns me. And, you know, in public accounts, I would prefer that we are respectful to anybody and everybody, whether we agree with them or disagree with them, that come before our committee, to be respectful regardless.
But Ms. Khalid, you would agree there's lots of testimony out there that is contradictory, and members, I think on both sides, are pressing as hard as they can for clarity, or as Mr. Drouin likes to say, truth. So I'll turn things back over to Mr. Cooper for a minute and a half.
I apologize, I cannot hear the question.
Oh, just 1 second. The witness could not hear you, so if you could turn your microphone on, and I will give you your time back at a minute and a half. Go ahead, please.
Former Liberal Minister Bains, the Ethics Commissioner's report says that Ms. Verschuren specifically raised the fact that she had a conflict of interest with you. Are you claiming you don't recall that Ms. Verschuren raised that with you?
Again, Mr. Chair, I've answered that question a number of times. I've been crystal clear that the names that were recommended to me went through a vetting process. Again, that's the answer I provided.
I asked you, do you not recall that conversation? Do you not recall that Leah Lawrence, the former CEO of the Green Slush Fund, spoke to officials in your office, and that the manager of communications and projects at SDTC also informed your office of Ms. Verschuren's conflict? Do you not recall any of that? Did none of that get to you? Is that what you're trying to represent?
Again, Mr. Chair, as I said in my opening remarks, I don't recall having such conversations, but it wouldn't be uncommon for me to encourage multiple people to apply for roles. I think it's important to note.
I would put it to you, former Liberal Minister Bains, that you knew full well that Ms. Verschuren had a conflict of interest, and you simply didn't care. And as a result, you appointed someone who was conflict-ridden, and that set a culture of conflict that led to conflict after conflict, mismanagement and corruption at SDTC, chronicled in the Auditor General's report. So
thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Any responsibility for that, those damning
I'm
findings?
afraid that is your time, Mr. Cooper. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair de Gagné, s'il vous plaît, pour
2.5 minutes, please. Mr. Bains, concerning the COVID payments, please, I'm going to reformulate the question I asked previously. Your department was aware of the conflicts of interests of board members, not only because it had access to the minutes, but because your ADM, Mr. Noseworthy, was in attendance at the board meeting that approved almost all of the COVID funds. Were you aware of that?
Thank you very much for the question. I do recall during the pandemic that funds were allocated to a number of organizations, including Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and that is the extent that monies were allocated. How they were dispersed was never brought to my attention because, as I indicated, that's a decision the board would make.
So the fact that your ADM was on the board and could attest to the fact that members of the board declared their conflicts of interest but did not recuse themselves, that you never got wind of that fact. The ADM never transmitted that information to you. Perhaps no, they weren't shocked that there was that kind of conduct going on?
The way you presented the question, I did not receive any such information from the ADM regarding the conduct of the board members.
D'accord. Donc, que saviez-vous?
And what were you aware of in terms of how the COVID payments were allocated?
Pour TDDC?
In terms of SDTC, that is.
So, as you've indicated, there was a number of payments made to individuals and organizations during that time period. And in this particular instance, monies were allocated to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and it was designed to support Canadian businesses, Canadian entrepreneurs to deal with this unprecedented crisis. And so this was standard across a number of industries and across a number of regions in Canada.
D'accord. Donc, malgré le...
I see. And so despite the fact, and I quote, that you sent a letter, and I'll quote you, the letter was in English, unfortunately, so I'll read it in English.
Economic Development Canada and SDTC share a strong working relationship, and I look forward to this continued collaboration. Donc, malgré cela...
So despite that, you really weren't aware of how those funds were allocated, even if your ADM attended the meeting, you have no idea whatsoever of how that all played out.
Yeah, the Assistant Deputy Minister reported to the Deputy Minister, nor did the ADM or the DM bring these issues to my attention.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Suivant.
Merci pour votre question.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you for your question.
Cannings again, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to continue that kind of line of questioning because, indeed, I was going to talk about Andrew Noseworthy, the ADM of yours that sat in on board meetings. You know, that's quite a high position, an ADM, and so I imagine he must have had some role, some guidance. You claim to have no knowledge of this or something, but the Deputy Minister must have sent him to these meetings with some role in mind, you know. As I say, I've been on cabinet-appointed boards before, 3 of them, and we never had an ADM sit in our meetings. Now, maybe it's because we didn't have the budget that SDTC was dealing with, but I'm sure there must have been some role for Mr. Noseworthy there, even though this is supposedly an arm's-length operation. So was he reporting to the Deputy Minister on what was going on? And was he under direction from the Deputy Minister to provide direction to the board? I'm quite curious about this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question that the members asked. And the member assessment is accurate, which is the Assistant Deputy Minister does report to the Deputy Minister. So my interactions with the Assistant Deputy Minister was fairly limited, and no such issues were raised that's been asked before with pertaining to the conflicts of interest.
So did the Deputy Minister bring it to your attention that, you know, these decisions were being made? You know, maybe board members were stepping out of the room when a vote was taken regarding something that they might have a financial interest in, but it sounds like they weren't recusing themselves from the actual discussion around that, but just recusing themselves for the vote. I'm just wondering, you know, if what the Auditor General has said is true, and you say you more or less accept that, I believe, then I would assume the Deputy Minister and the Assistant Deputy Minister would have been concerned with how things were transpiring in this in the board meetings.
Yeah, no such issues were brought to my attention, as I indicated, and my understanding was that all the board members would conduct themselves in a manner that was consistent with the obligations they had to respect how to deal with conflicts of interest. But these issues were never brought to my attention.
Brief question? No, very good. Thank you very much. Turning now to Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Oh, and just before that, Mr. Bains, if you're able, and I know you're answering a lot of questions in between, if you could put your microphone on mute. I know that can be difficult when you're going back and forth, But in particular, if you do touch or adjust your headset, you can put it on mute, because it does make a feedback signal which can interfere with the and even potentially harm the interpreter. So if you would do your best on that, please. But in particular, if you find you have to adjust your headset, please mute it. And you can mute it when you're not answering questions. That'd be appreciated as well.
Understood, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the couple times I did that was because I was having difficulty hearing the question.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the feedback, and I will mute it.
Yeah, and no problem. If you want to just pause for 10 seconds, that's no problem as well. So, and do you know how to mute your mic? I should ask that as well before we proceed.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
You would not be the first who does not. So it's one of those things that I just want to double check. Thank you.